In a U.S. prison where every wall remembers the screams of the weak, an old janitor was humiliated in front of everyone. Nobody knew he once trained the very men who now mocked him. One sentence, just one, made the whole room fall silent. And in that silence, justice began to breathe again. Morning slid down the cinder block walls of Silver Ridge like a pale sheet, turning every flaw into a neat line. The cafeteria smelled of bleach, metal, and coffee that had boiled 1 hour too long. Inspection day made the place look cleaner than it lived. Guards stood straighter, inmates spoke in undertones, and the hum of the lights felt like a drill instructor pacing the ceiling. Samuel Cole worked his mop in slow, even strokes, the way a careful man sands a splintered board. 60 carried lightly on his shoulders, but there was no hurry in him. His bucket rolled beside his knee like a quiet dog. He paused to wring the head once, water threaded back into the pail in thin silver strings. On most days he passed through rooms like this without leaving a wake. That was the unspoken arrangement. He kept the world clean. The world looked through him. The doors sighed open. Captain Monroe entered like a promise he meant to collect. The federal inspectors fanned behind him with clipboards and traveling smiles. His boots were black mirrors. His jaw was set for photographs. "Gentlemen," he said, voice ringing too warm, "you won't find a tighter ship." He made a broad sweep of the hand as if he had built the floor himself. Then he saw Samuel. Monroe turned deliberately and stepped onto the stripe Samuel had just finished. The sole printed a dark crescent on the shine. "Well now," he said, glancing back at the inspectors, "even dirt knows its place." A polite cough from the oldest inspector passed for laughter. A spoon paused over a tray on the upper tier. Samuel kept his eyes on the tile. "Maybe dirt just fell where it was told, sir." The answer was soft, but it carried. Lopez, near the door, lifted her chin a fraction. Her gaze flashed to the camera in the corner, red light blinking steady as a second hand. 2 of the younger guards smirked. Monroe's smile hardened by a degree. "You trying to be clever, Cole?" he asked. "This mop give you a podium?" "No, sir," Samuel said, ringing once more. "Just time to listen." The room tightened. Monroe touched his baton the way men check a watch, a small reminder he owned the hour. He turned slightly so the inspectors could see his profile. "Let's demonstrate standards." He faced Samuel. "On your knees. Hand clean the scuff by the drain." Samuel's eyes traveled to the drain. It gleamed like a coin. "There's no scuff, Captain? Then make one." Monroe's boot kicked the bucket. Water sloshed, slid out in a slow fan, kissed Samuel's cuffs, and kept going. The sound was not loud, but it was the only sound. Samuel set the bucket upright and steadied the handle. "Section 3.4, he said, as if reviewing a list. Monroe blinked. "What's that supposed to be?" "Proportional response," Samuel said. "From the manual you signed off on." One inspector stopped writing and looked up. Lopez's fingers curled, then flattened at her sides. A murmur rose from the second tier and wilted at a guard's glance. Color climbed Monroe's neck. "You think quoting policy makes you different?" he said. "You clean. You keep your mouth shut." Samuel lifted his head fully now. He wasn't tall, but his stillness made space. "I know what clean looks like, sir." It wasn't a threat, and that made it worse. Monroe stepped close enough for the smell of aftershave and coffee to arrive a beat before his words. "On your knees," he said, low and certain, "or I will put you there." An inspector shifted, chair squeaking like a guilty thought. Lopez's voice found a small doorway. "Captain." "Quiet," Monroe snapped, eyes never leaving Samuel's. Samuel's reply came like a held breath setting itself free. "Respect doesn't come from titles." The sentence struck a strange chord, and for a moment the whole room listened for its echo. Above, an inmate whispered, "Damn," the sound half prayer, half surprise. Monroe's baton lifted a few inches, enough to put teeth on the silence. "You think that camera saves you?" he said. "Cameras don't save," Samuel answered. "They remember." Pens stalled. The oldest inspector looked at the lens as if it might look back. Monroe's jaw worked. He wanted to deliver a lesson, and the camera was making a record of how he chose to teach it. He nudged the spill with his toe until it lapped his boot. "Last chance," he said. "Kneel." "No." "Not loud?" Not hurried. Final. Something like a breeze moved through men who hadn't felt one in years. Lopez took half a step forward and stopped when Monroe's shoulder squared toward her. Bah! The intercom crackled overhead. Official and distant. Command post. Training evaluators entering East Corridor. Maintain positions. The words passed through the room like weather. Acknowledged, denied, recorded. One of the younger inspectors made a note and pretended it was about ventilation. Samuel leaned the mop against the table and looked past Monroe toward the doorway, where the inspector's line bent around a gray-haired man with a thin scar along his jaw. Their eyes met. Recognition crossed the other man's face like cloud shadow leaving a field. Samuel gave the smallest nod, acknowledgement without request. Monroe followed none of it. His voice rose to fill the camera's red blink. You forget where you are, Cole. You forget your place. Samuel lowered his gaze to the puddle and then returned it to the captain. Careful, he said. You're standing in what you made. The line walked across the room and sat down next to everyone's shoes. In the rafters, a fluorescent tube buzzed, flickered, steadied. The inspectors didn't move. Neither did the guards. The inmates leaned in as far as the bars would allow. Monroe drew a breath like a man about to bench press a decision. He lifted the baton the last inch. From the hall beyond the swinging door came a hard metallic clang, clean, bright, undeniable. A second later a hiss rose, not a whisper but a promise, the sound of something under pressure finding a way out. Warm air touched the edge of the room. Lopez's eyes cut to the vent. The red light blinked once again, steady as a metronome turning page. No one spoke. Pride, policy, and the thin film of water weighted on the tile together. Samuel squared the bucket with his foot, set his shoulders, and stood as if the floor were choosing sides. Rain had been falling for 3 days before the inspection, the kind that whispered against the roof and slid down the narrow windows like a clock nobody wound. Nights in Silver Ridge were quiet, except for that sound, rain and metal breathing together. Samuel liked those hours best. The noise of the world softened, tempers cooled. He could work without having to watch his back or his tone. He pushed his mop down the East Corridor, every stroke steady, measured, the rhythm older than the place itself. His reflection bent across the wet tile like a ghost he didn't mind keeping company with. Around the corner came raised voices, sharp, young, untrained. You think you can mouth off to me? Officer Briggs barked. His baton rattled against Redmond's cell bars. The inmate sat on the floor, arms crossed over his knees, lip bleeding, pride louder than his pain. Samuel turned the corner, eyes level. That's enough, Briggs. Briggs swung his glare toward him, face flushed. You don't get to tell me what's enough. You clean, old man. That's it. Samuel didn't raise his voice. Then I'll clean when you're done making a mess. The words didn't need volume. They landed with weight. Briggs hesitated, chewing the air for something to say, then spat on the floor and stormed off. The echo of his boots lingered longer than he did. Samuel crouched near the bars. Hold still, he said, pulling a folded towel from his cart. Keep pressure on it. Slow. Don't grind it. Redmond took the towel, frowning. Why'd you step in? You'll catch hell for that. Samuel straightened, wringing his rag into the bucket. Maybe, but sometimes quiet needs to speak first. The boy watched him for a moment, curiosity fighting suspicion. You talk different? You used to teach or something? Samuel's mouth curved slightly. Something like that. He started down the hall again, the wheels of his cart squeaking soft. The kid called after him. What's your deal, old man? Samuel didn't look back. Learning doesn't stop just because class is over. By midnight, the rain came harder, hammering the roof in waves. Samuel worked in the supply room, sorting stacks of old paperwork. A torn manual slid from a folder, half-burned, coffee-stained. The title barely visible, Federal Tactical Response Training. Across the bottom margin, in faded ink, 5 words had survived. Respect is a weapon, too. He read them twice, then folded the page carefully and slipped it into his pocket. The door creaked open. Still here? Lopez stood in the frame, holding 2 cups of coffee. Rain's good company, he said. You ever sleep? When the floor does. She smiled, shaking her head. You always talk like that? Like what? Like every sentence should be written down somewhere. She stepped inside, glancing at the shelves. What's this? Her hand brushed over a thick blue book, Applied Behavioral Control. She opened it, frowned at the seal inside. Quantico issue. That's FBI training material. Samuel kept folding towels, not looking up. Old reading. Helps me understand people. Where'd you get it? From an old locker, he said. Same place I found Patience. She eyed him a second longer, half smiling. You ever think about leaving this place? Doing more? He wrung a rag slowly. Places like this need quiet people more than loud ones. Somebody has to listen while everyone else shouts. The rain drummed above them, softer now. Lopez leaned against the doorway. You ever think this place can change? Samuel looked at the bucket, at his reflection rippling inside. Not the place, he said, but maybe the people. She nodded once. Good night, Mr. Cole. Good night, Officer Lopez. When she left, he sat on the stool by the sink, but pulled the folded paper from his pocket and read it again under the flicker of the light. The words seemed heavier in the dark. Respect is a weapon, too. He tucked it away and stood. Before dawn, he walked the corridor once more. Redmond was awake, sitting on his bunk. The towel at his lip had dried brown. Samuel stopped. Keep your head steady, he said quietly. Calm spreads faster than anger. Redmond blinked, nodding slowly. You think so? I know so. Samuel turned, the mop wheels squeaking a rhythm that followed him all the way to the end of the hall. Outside, the rain eased, but the air still smelled of something waiting to happen. The day of the inspection began with a silence that didn't trust itself. Even the inmates moved quieter, their laughter clipped short, their steps timed to the rhythm of command. Silver Ridge gleamed under fluorescent light, too bright, too still, like a photograph of control. Samuel wheeled his cart into the cafeteria just before dawn, steam curling from the coffee urns. He could feel the tension in the walls, in the way every voice carried a second too far. At 8 sharp, the main doors opened. Captain Monroe marched in with 3 federal inspectors trailing behind him, all carrying the same polite unease of men who'd rather be somewhere else. His uniform was perfect, his expression fixed somewhere between charm and warning. Gentlemen, Monroe said, voice warm but hollow, Silver Ridge runs tight because I keep it that way. He didn't need to say who I was. He made sure they all saw. Samuel kept working, pushing the mop slowly across the floor. The sound of water over tile filled the space between sentences. Monroe's eyes flicked to him, then lingered. He turned to the inspectors with a smirk. See this man? Been here years. Knows his place. Right, Cole? Samuel didn't look up. Place is just where you stand, sir. Doesn't tell much about who you are. Lopez, stationed by the door, stiffened. One of the inspectors raised an eyebrow. Monroe's grin tightened. You always got something to say, don't you? I talk when spoken to. Then maybe I should stop speaking, Monroe said, but his voice carried too much amusement to sound harmless. He paced closer, his boots leaving prints on the fresh wax. You missed a spot. Samuel followed the prints with his eyes. I'll get it. Now, Monroe pointed to the wet patch near the drain. On your knees. Use the rag. Let's show the inspectors what dedication looks like. The words floated over the room like smoke. The guards watching went still. The inmates on the upper deck leaned forward. Samuel didn't move. There's nothing there, Captain, he said quietly. Monroe's tone dropped. Then make something. He kicked the bucket, water sloshing across the floor. There! Clean that! A thin sheet of water spread around Samuel's boots. He bent, righted the bucket, and wrung the mop slowly. Section 3.4, he murmured. What? Monroe barked. Proportional response, Samuel said, eyes calm. Page 7 of the conduct manual. The nearest inspector froze, pen hovering over the clipboard. Monroe blinked, confused. You quoting me my own rules? Just reminding you they exist. The laughter that followed was nervous and short-lived. Monroe's jaw worked, anger climbing up his throat. You think that makes you special? You're a janitor, Cole. Don't forget that. I haven't, Samuel said, but I remember what came before, too. Something about the tone, the weight of memory, landed wrong. Lopez glanced toward the camera in the corner. The red light blinked, steady as a heartbeat. Monroe stepped closer until his shadow swallowed Samuel's shoulders. "On your knees," he hissed. Samuel straightened instead. The mop handle stood like a walking stick between them. No. It wasn't defiance shouted loud. It was a refusal carved in stone. The word hung there until even the lights seemed to hold their hum. "Excuse me?" Monroe said. Samuel's voice didn't rise. "You can't make respect by taking it from someone else." A sound broke from one of the upper tiers, a single, low "yeah," cut off instantly by a guard's glare. Monroe turned crimson. "You forget who you're talking to?" Samuel's eyes stayed steady. "No, sir. I remember exactly who you are." The inspectors exchanged looks. One of them muttered, "This is being recorded, right?" Lopez nodded without a word. Monroe's hand twitched near his baton. "You think that camera saves you?" "Cameras don't save," Samuel said. "They remember." Silence. The line fell like a stone in a deep well. Monroe's hand shook just slightly, the baton grazing his thigh. Then came a metallic clang from somewhere beyond the kitchen wall, a sharp, echoing sound that made everyone turn. Steam hissed from the vent, rolling out like breath. Monroe barked, "Stay put!" But the words carried less command than panic. Samuel didn't move. He just watched the ceiling where the noise came from, eyes narrowing. "Something's wrong with the line," he said. Another clang answered him, louder. A pipe trembled along the wall. One of the inspectors stepped back. Lopez radioed for maintenance, voice quick. Monroe snapped, "Nobody moves till I say so." Samuel took one step toward the back door. "You'll want to clear the floor, Captain. Pressure's building." "Don't tell me my job." Samuel met his eyes. "Then do it." A pause. The hiss turned into a roar. Somewhere a valve screamed. The inspectors ducked instinctively. Samuel braced against the wall. The sound tore through the air. Metal giving way. A burst of steam exploded from the vent, filling the room in white fog. Through the haze, Monroe's outline wavered, baton raised, authority slipping. Samuel's voice cut through the hiss, calm as a held breath. "Respect doesn't come from titles, Captain. It comes from how you stand when things break." The steam swallowed the rest of his words. The cafeteria vanished in a wash of steam and noise. The hiss roared like a train in a tunnel, filling every corner with heat. Someone shouted, another coughed. Then the fire alarm began to wail, sharp and metallic. Samuel moved first. He could barely see, but his steps were sure, his instincts older than the chaos itself. "Lopez," he called, voice cutting through the fog. "Shut the main valve, north side." She hesitated, half blind, then followed his voice toward the freezer room. Steam burned her throat as she ran. Monroe's orders collided with the alarm. "Nobody moves. You hear me? Nobody." Samuel didn't look back. He pushed an overturned table aside, spotted the sparking wire hissing on the wet floor, and wrapped the mop head in a towel before hooking it away from the puddle. The flash died with a crack, leaving the smell of ozone behind. "Valve!" he yelled again. "Found it!" Lopez's voice came muffled. A metallic groan echoed as she turned the wheel. The hiss softened to a sigh. The fog thinned enough for shapes to reappear. Inspectors crouched by the wall, guards frozen mid-motion, Monroe standing in the middle of the chaos, eyes wide, unsure whether to bark or run. Samuel knelt beside a man on the ground. One of the inspectors, gray suit, broken glasses, pulse fluttering but steady. "He's breathing," Samuel said, pressing 2 fingers against the neck. "Get me a towel." A younger guard tossed one over. Samuel wrapped it around the man's arm where a sharp piece of pipe had torn through his sleeve. "Keep pressure here," he told the guard, who obeyed without question. When Samuel stood, Monroe was there, face red, spitting heat. "Who told you to take charge, Cole?" "No one had to," Samuel said simply. "I gave orders, and people almost died following them." His tone stayed even, steady as the cooling air. The double doors slammed open. 2 agents in tactical jackets stormed in, followed by a woman in a dark federal uniform. She took in the scene at a glance, the steam, the blood, the standing water. "Captain Monroe," she said, flashing a badge. "Deputy Director Hale, Federal Corrections. What happened here?" Monroe straightened instantly. "Minor malfunction, ma'am?" "Contained." Her eyes found Samuel. The words died in her throat. "Sergeant Cole?" The sound of his name, his real name, hung in the air. Monroe blinked, looking between them. Who? Hale stepped closer. Samuel Cole, Quantico, Tactical Response Division. You trained half the federal staff we've got. The room went silent. The only sound was water dripping from the ceiling into the puddle below. Monroe's voice cracked. He's a janitor. Hale's gaze was cold steel. Retired instructor, consultant. You've been working under his revised safety protocol for 3 years. She turned toward the inspectors. You all saw him act when this started? They nodded, one still holding his injured arm. He saved me, the man said quietly. Hale exhaled. Then the records are clear. Monroe's face drained of color. Ma'am, You ignored procedure, Captain, Hale cut in. You endangered staff and civilians. You're relieved of duty pending review. He stood frozen, the authority in his voice collapsing under the weight of hers. Hale turned back to Samuel. You could have left this life behind, you know. Why stay here? Samuel wiped his hands on a rag, in the corners of his mouth almost smiling. Some lessons stick better when you teach them where they're needed most. She studied him for a beat, then nodded slowly. Still the same man. Monroe tried to speak, but no sound came. Steam still rose in faint ribbons around his boots. The red light of the camera blinked above, recording everything. Samuel met his eyes one last time. Respect's not given, Captain. It's practiced. Monroe looked down, saw his reflection in the wet floor, small, shaking, blurred by ripples. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight pierced through the windows, cutting long beams across the cafeteria. Dust and steam shimmered in the light like the room itself was being washed clean. Samuel stood quietly in it, hands still steady, eyes calm. Cameras don't save, he said softly, mostly to himself. They remember. And this time, the whole room understood exactly what that meant. The next morning, Silver Ridge sounded different. The echoes that once carried orders and insults now drifted softer, like the place was still catching its breath. The cafeteria smelled faintly of soap instead of bleach. Men moved slower, careful not to disturb whatever fragile calm had settled overnight. Captain Monroe sat in the warden's office, the blinds half closed against the light. His uniform jacket hung on the chair beside him, crisp but useless. A disciplinary report lay open on the desk, its words sharp and black. Negligence, abuse of authority, pending suspension. He traced the letters with a finger that had nowhere else to go. The sound of a mop dragging faintly in the hall came through the door, steady as a heartbeat he no longer controlled. Downstairs, Samuel moved through the corridor with his cart. Lopez caught up to him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She passed one over, her tone quiet. He's suspended. Samuel nodded once. That's what paper's for, to catch what pride misses. Lopez leaned against the wall beside him. You didn't have to stay yesterday. You could have walked away when they showed up. I was already here, Samuel said. Seemed rude to leave before the lesson ended. She laughed under her breath. You know, the inspectors are still talking about you. They said you ran that floor like a commander. Old habits, he said. They don't quit easy. She sipped her coffee, studying him. What made you come back to places like this? After what you used to do? Samuel wrung out the mop, the sound of dripping water filling the pause. You spend years teaching men how to control chaos. Then you see what happens when they never learn. Maybe this is still part of the job. Monroe didn't learn much, she said. Not yet, he answered. Learning's heavier for some folks. They have to trip over it first. Inmate Redmond appeared at the end of the hall, holding a small bag and transfer papers. His bruises had faded, replaced by something steadier in his eyes. Heard you're the guy who saves people now, he said with a grin. Samuel chuckled softly. You heading out? Yeah, they're moving me upstate. Cleaner program. Thought I'd say thanks before I go. Samuel handed him a folded towel. Keep it. Never know when you'll need to clean a mess you didn't make. Redmond held the towel for a long moment, then nodded. You ever think maybe this place needed you more than you needed it? Samuel smiled. Maybe we're even. Lopez watched the boy walk away, then turned to Samuel. You're aware everyone's quoting you now, right? Half the guards are saying that line. Respect's not given, it's practiced. Hope they mean it, Samuel said. She smirked. You really think people can change? He met her eyes. If they couldn't, I'd have retired for real. Later that afternoon, Samuel pushed his cart past Monroe's office. The blinds were still half closed. On the desk sat a sealed envelope, his suspension letter. Samuel hesitated, then slid a small piece of folded paper beneath it. The corners were damp from his hand. Lopez arrived just as he straightened. "You left something for him?" He nodded. "A reminder." She picked it up when he walked away. The note was simple. Respect is a weapon too. Monroe sat alone when he found it, the afternoon light cutting thin bars across the desk. He read it twice before folding it carefully and setting it beside the report. Down the hall, the sound of Samuel's mop whispered along the tile, steady, unhurried, sure. The floor behind him gleamed in the fading sun, like the building itself was trying to start. A month passed, and Silver Ridge felt like a different building. The shouting was gone. The tension drained from its bones. The walls still carried the same scars, but the air moved easier, lighter. Morning light spilled through the high windows, catching on the polished floors Samuel once cleaned every day. The place smelled of soap and coffee instead of sweat and pride. Lopez arrived early, her footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. On her desk sat a brown envelope stamped with the federal seal. She opened it carefully. Inside was a thin gray binder titled Crisis Response Manual, Revised 2025. The author's name printed neat at the bottom, Samuel Cole, Consultant. She flipped through the pages, her eyes tracing his handwriting in the margins. Short reminders filled the edges like quiet instructions from a teacher who still believed in his students. Breathe first. Shrink the circle. Choose the smallest safe step. And at the bottom of one page, faint pencil marks read, Calm is contagious. Lopez smiled to herself. Still teaching, old man. A knock came at the door. Redmond stood there, visitor badge clipped to his shirt. His face looked older somehow, but steadier. "They actually let me in without a strip search," he said with a grin. "Guess they decided I'm reformed." "You look it," Lopez said, handing him the binder. "Look who wrote this." He flipped a few pages, reading one of the underlined lines aloud. "Respect doesn't start in rules, it starts in people." He shook his head. "That sounds just like him." "Because it is him," she said. He finished it before he left. Redmond's voice softened. "Where'd he go?" Lopez leaned back in her chair. "Didn't say. Just clocked out one night, left his badge on the hook." They both fell silent for a moment, listening to the hum of the lights. From the far end of the hallway came the sound of a familiar voice, Monroe's, but quieter now, stripped of its edge. He stood before a group of new recruits, speaking without notes. "Respect isn't about who salutes first," he said. "It's about how you hold yourself when nobody's watching." Redmond tilted his head. "That sound like him to you?" "Almost," Lopez said. "He's still learning the tone." They walked together down the corridor. The morning sun painted long streaks across the walls. On Monroe's office door, the same old piece of paper still hung, edges curled, ink faded. Respect is a weapon, too. Beneath it, in fresh handwriting, a new note read, "Use it to build, not to break." Lopez touched the corner of the note lightly. "He'd like that," she said. Redmond smiled. "He'd probably say it's not about liking, it's about learning." Outside, the yard was quiet. From a radio near the security desk, an old Sam Cooke song floated through the hall. "A change is gonna come." The melody lingered in the air, slow and steady, the kind of tune that made even walls listen. Lopez stood by the window, watching the light pour across the floor, turning the dull gray tiles into something close to silver. "He really did change this place," she whispered. Redmond nodded. "Guess clean can mean more than just floors." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that starts small and stays a long time. The radio faded. The hum of the lights softened. The building for once sounded at peace. And somewhere in that quiet, whether memory or wind, Samuel's voice seemed to return, low and certain, like an echo that refused to die. Respect doesn't come from titles. It comes from how you treat people when you think no one's watching. Outside, sunlight spread wide, touching every wall, every scar, every corner once heavy with anger. Inside, the silence breathed easy again. Silver Ridge had finally learned how to listen.